Welcome back to 7th Grade Mustache. On today's episode, we'll be speaking about ancient African empires. I came up in a time when knowledge itself was really important. It was paramount. And learning about true history, the history that has been hidden for the longest time, is something that everybody was clamoring for. There was black bookstores popping up everywhere, and you could go from city to city and find new books and learn about new authors. You can get Steve Coakley tapes and learn about Bobby Hibbin and the stuff that he has to say. All of that is mostly gone now, because now what you have are people on Instagram and TikTok. Most of the time, they can just stay out of the frame, but they're in the frame pointing up at something. You could just post it, be like, hey, look at this. You know what I'm saying? But you got to be in there pointing your finger up like, look at this. Read. Like, motherfucker, if you post it, that means I need to read it. So the point I'm making with all this, there is a lack of books being written by new Black history authors. It's like 1/10 of what there used to be in the 90s and early 2000s. Everybody wants to make a documentary. They want to shoot something and put it on YouTube. I started this discussion talking about books. There are books that you pass around to people that you get from the stores and you keep in your collection. These can't be deleted. Yeah, you can burn them down, but you cannot delete books. Well, you can shadow ban all these videos and people can't see them. But I can walk into a black bookstore and I can find this stuff. The reason why, and I have to illustrate, you couldn't go into Walden Books or, all these other bookstores back in the day before there was Borders and Barnes & Noble and finding this stuff. And to be honest, you can't find this shit in Barnes & Noble's bookstores now.
If you go in there now, you'll find some old, like the Black Civilization book you'll find an old book like that from the 40s, literally.
You can get that stuff because it's been ordered by somebody.
Yeah.
It's not something that they keep in their regular book rotation. The type of African-American books or African books they keep in their regular rotation are the people that are putting out rhetoric, basic ass shit that has been fed to them by Marxists. They don't have Stolen Legacy in there. They don't have Anthony Browder exploding the Nile Valley myths. They don't have this stuff in there. They don't have Chancellor Williams, the destruction of African civilization from 2000 BC to 2000 AD. They don't have that in there. They have these wannabe intellectual Negroes that went to these white universities and they call themselves experts, like Ibrahim Kendi. Like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, who are you, man? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? I am here to talk about facts. So what I want to start with is the ancient Ethiopian empires. Before the Solomonic dynasty, before the time of King Solomon. See, people think, you look at Ethiopia and they talk about, well, we're the lineage of Solomon and Sheba. That's cool. But I want to talk about the greatness before Solomon and Sheba was even part of this. Who did she come from? Who are her people? Who did she descend from? So I want to start with the land of Punt, P-U-N-T. It was located in the region that today contains Somalia, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. Its true name was Ta-Netjer, the land of the gods. It was given that name because of its abundance and luxury. The residents of Punt did not live on the ground. They had beehive-shaped homes on stilts. Now already this sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. I'm like, all right, I'm in. Tell me more. They lived in these houses to raise themselves off the ground and protect themselves from serpents and other roaming animals. Now, the land of Punt was known for exporting exotic woods and various lumbers and goods that appear in Egyptian art and literature. Now, this region in Eastern Africa was known for its rich resources, including gold, ivory, and ebony. And, of course, it was a major trading partner with Egypt. It existed 4,500 years ago, the time of the 5th Egyptian dynasty. It began in the year 2498 BC and ran until 1069 BC. Now, they had gold, they had 31 species of incense trees. They had exotic lumber, they had cosmetics, animal skins, and much more. During the 18th Egyptian dynasty, Queen Hatshepsut embarked on an expedition to Punt in 1493 BC. She returned with living trees and transplanted them in Egypt. That was the first record of anybody transplanting trees from another nation.
Okay, let's not forget. So one of the big things that came from this was, I want to say this correctly. So a lot of white folks found out that there were black pharaohs, and their whole thing is the black pharaohs. Of what they were attempting to say is that Egypt was Arab the whole time. No, Arabs got there 200 AD. So before that, Egypt was black, and Egypt even said that they came from the south, and they came up because the Nile flows south to north. So you had modern black pharaohs come out of that Punt area, which is Somali, Ethiopia, and all that. They had pharaohs come from that. But Egypt says, when you look at Kemet, they talk about where they came from. They say they came from the area of the moon, the mountain of the moon, which is in that area. So they migrated north. So that history is been warped quite a bit. But yes, they had black pharaohs come from the Punt area when they took over a couple times. So that's something they don't want to talk about. They always make it seem like Egypt's always been Arab. No, Egypt became Arab in 200 AD. 200 AD is the last time that they had a black pharaoh. So, oh my God, I see you getting deep. The other thing I was going to bring up is something that you brought up months and months and months ago. We had talked about briefly, and when you talked about canceling stuff, Kyrie Irving. Now, Kyrie Irving is a brother who went out and found his real history. He mentions a documentary on Prime that he thinks you should watch because it talks about Hebrews. And that dude got blackballed, lost his career, lost his bonus. He got his money back because he ended up suing for that. But so this is what Ross was talking about when he's talking about something tangible. A book is tangible. He also talked about these new Johnny-come-latelys who talk about anything Marxist they could think of. That was some deep shit you just said. You know, these books now, or I'll give you an example of somebody who I hate because they always bring, is that Kamau dude, Kamau Bell or whatever his name is. He is completely out of shape, which is ironic because I'm out of shape. But he's this out of shape dude that's never been in shape, educated in all these white schools, married a white woman, which that's not a big deal. But he acts like he's just this cauldron of black knowledge, and he's not. So when you talk about the guys that we grew up on, you name Coakley, you name Bobby Hemmett, you name these people that everybody now is getting a hold of. That's the crazy part. The guys that me and you started reading and understanding back in 92, 93, 94, these guys are just not getting a hold of them. And you said so much deep stuff, but I think the biggest thing that I wanted to bring up is the ability to cancel somebody and to cancel documentary and make it impossible for you to find. That's why Ross was talking about having your own tapes, because I still got a few tapes out there. I had a Steve Coakley tape, which is what introduced me to him. But having your own reading material that somebody cannot come back and alter. So you ain't got to worry about AI changing what's in your book. And like I said, something you said really deep a while back when you were talking about how a lot of these guys from these old nations would memorize the Bible because the jinn can go back in time and change it. That's the age that we live in right now with people changing history. Man, like, yeah, you want one today, bro. It's really important to have your own books. Purchase them, find them at a garage sale, wherever you find them, but hold on to them tight because that cannot be altered. You can go back and reference it. And sometimes we find new stuff. They find a new dig, they open a new tomb. Egypt, cool, but you still need that book for reference.
The Sabaean Empire began around 1200 BC. The Sabaeans were people who lived in the region of modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea. The kingdom covered an area that spread east into the southernmost part of Yemen. These people are not Arabs, because Arabs would not exist in that area for another 800 years. The term Arab refers to tribal people that lived west of the lower Euphrates River and concentrated in the area that is today northern and central Saudi Arabia. The Sabaeans are believed to have been a major power in the region and may have been the ancestors of the modern-day Ethiopian people. They built their wealth on growing and selling spices and other agricultural products. They traded through caravans across the landscape and by boats on the sea. The Sabaean Empire would eventually fall to invaders from Persia, Iran, and Muslim invaders 800 years later. So then you have these people who are descendants of the people in the land of Punt. So you have 4,500 years ago, all the way up until the time when the Sabaeans begin, maybe 100 years after the fall of the land of Punt Empire. So then you have the Sabaeans, which exist for some time, and they're crossing that waterway in the Arabian Sea between the Horn of Africa and Saudi Arabia. And they're in this area, and they're trading, and they're controlling that area, and there's several kingdoms and dynasties that control the area for hundreds and hundreds of years. We'll say 1,000 years or so. And then after that, you have the kingdom of Dimit. D''Mt, Dimit. The kingdom of Dimit was a kingdom that existed from the 10th to the 5th century BC and is believed to have been a major power in the region and may have been a precursor to the Axumite Empire. So Axum, A-X-U-M, it was an empire, but it is now a city in a mountainous region in central Ethiopia. I learned about Axum in 2003 when I went to Italy and I was shooting a micro documentary about the Axum obelisk. Axum obelisk is an obelisk that was created during the Axum Empire, but it was stolen by Mussolini when he went to Italy in his attempt to invade, but they were unsuccessful. So in retreating, they stole this huge artifact. That artifact was returned to Ethiopia in 2017, and it was after they built the runways and roads to this area so they could fly a C-17 airplane, a huge military airplane that could load it into there and then fly it back to Ethiopia. So now that Axum obelisk is now back in Ethiopia. So this Axum Empire ruled Ethiopia from the 1st century to the 8th century. And they were known for their trade networks, 1st century to 8th century AD. They were known for their trade networks and their conversion to Christianity in the 4th century. It was the Axum Empire who controlled the Ethiopian coastline as well as southern Yemen. It was the people of Axum who basically controlled the area that was established by the Sabaean Empire 1,000 years before.
It was King Axum converted them back to Christianity. There was a queen before that basically almost erased Christianity altogether from the region. King Axum, when his empire went into place, he brought Christianity back. They kind of went back and forth for a couple generations. But since you talk about it, let's talk about obelisks and pyramids. What area has the most obelisks and pyramids? Is it Egypt?
It's Nubia. Nubia has the most.
Yes, very good. Nubia is the same region that we're talking about of Punt and going all the way back. In fact, the largest obelisk in the world, which is tipped over, I don't want to lie, I think, is it 200 tons? Something like that. It was 200 tons, and it still lays there to this day. The reason I bring that up is because white folks have you convinced that Egypt in North Africa had nothing to do with the rest of Africa, and it was this magic civilization. No. When you go do your research, there are more pyramids and more obelisks in the area of Nubia, Punt / current modern day Ethiopia than anywhere else in the world. Hundreds and hundreds of them. And when you look up the largest obelisk, because they couldn't take the largest one, they took a little one to Italy. You understand what I'm saying? But if they took the largest one, there's no plane, there's no way they can't even stand it upright. So it's really important to understand that this rich history and these people have lived there and looked like they have all these years. The reason that's important is because you got people telling you that these Ethiopians are mixed. Roscoe will break that shit down for you. There are so many misinformed brothers, and something that we've talked about in past casts. We always talk. There's 5 phenotypes. There are 5 faces in Africa that have been there for hundreds of thousands of
One thing
years.
people misunderstand about Africa, they think everybody in Africa is dark skinned. What you have to understand is the dark skin is a melanic reaction to the intense heat at the equator. So the darkest people in Africa live at the equator. As you get further from the equator, you have pure blood Africans that are lighter because they don't have to live under intense sun all the time. Everybody thinks that Africa is like this hot ass place and it's fucking shitty and it's horrible conditions and all that. No. Don't be misconstrued by all that. It's a continent. It's fucking huge. So there's huge swings in climate as you go from the equator north or the equator south.
First things first, let's go back in history. The largest freshwater lake that's ever existed was in Chad. It's called, they call it Lake Chad. It no longer exists, but this is the largest freshwater in the world. Second, we know this 12,000 years ago, Africa, you call it sub-Saharan Africa, that whole area was lush and green. This is the whole thing that people love to debate.
No, the Saharan desert used to be a forest, used to be a savanna.
Yes, yeah, used to be a jungle, whatever you want to call it, but it was a lush green area.
So that when the Dogon people were traveling back and forth between East Africa and West Africa, they were probably walking through a landscape that was changing from a forest into a desert over time. So then when the first generations of people were migrating to Egypt back and forth, the landscape looked different than the last generation that left the pharaohs and returned to Dogon. Those people probably walked straight through a desert. But you got to understand, they were making this pilgrimage for probably thousands of years. So they saw the landscape changing over time naturally. Natural climate change.
Here's what Roscoe's talking about. So the Dogon are in Mauritania. I want to say it correctly.
Mauritania.
Now, most of the people you see in Mauritania are North African Arabs that have migrated north from all the way from Saudi Arabia, all the way from that area, and they took over North Africa. But funny, the people who are the interior people who have the
hold on, you made a mistake. The Dogon people are from Mali.
Well, the Dogon people say that they actually came from Egypt. When you talk about their old,
they're not from Mauritania. They're from Mali.
No, yeah, but they traveled east, is what I'm saying. You are correct, but it's just ironic that when you think of these areas, you think of these light-skinned people who mostly have Arab background or also Berber background. The Berber people existed too. So you have a mix of people at the top, but then you also have these dark-skinned people who don't look like regular West Africans either. That's the other part. So this whole idea, slavery has altered our reality so much to you just, sub-Saharan African or West African, and you think they're just dark, or you think they're just built a certain way. Where that's why we brought up the fact there's 5 phenotypes. There are 5 different type of people that have been in Africa, period. Before anybody else got there, these people look like this. These people down here look like this. These people right here look like this. These people right here look like this. And these people in this East Africa look like this. So the idea that these people all had contact with each other, because you just talked about how the trade with the Punt, they had heavy trade regions. They were trading with we know this because they were trading frankincense and myrrh with other nations outside of Africa and inside of Africa. We found out that Egypt talks about those trees. They also talk about giraffes and I think baboons coming from that area. They would import those. So again, that's a lie that they tell you that Egypt had no other contact with nobody else. That's not wrong. Berbers, they are very specific people who've looked that way. Because you want to say, they're Berbers because they're mixed with Arab. No, Berbers have looked the way they've looked for years, and they had a region that was part Africa, part Asia. They had all that area of the Mediterranean. So the reason we're talking about this is because people really how do I want to say this? People have been so misled that this is that Africa is just these dark skinned people, and if you're in Africa and you're light skinned, it's because you're mixed with something else. That is
So
not
explain why the Bantu people of South Africa look the way they do. Or that movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy.
crazy. Yep.
Those are
So,
light skinned Africans. Those aren't
well,
dark skinned Africans.
hold it. How about the size and height? Those people look a specific. They have a specific phenotype, body type.
Because
Not,
that's a different type of African. So
yeah,
you
yes,
also have these bush people these tribal people who represent the earliest humanoids on the planet. And they have a skeletal structure that is shorter than a lot of the other Africans around them. They look different than the people around them.
hold it. Now the Bantu, these modern day Bantu people are comprised of 6 or 7 tribes as the Bantu migration acquired of the people. But the bottom line, they walked from Central Africa to Southern Africa, and they have a rich history. That's the whole thing. Their history is so much older than what you're told. You're told, excuse me, we're told, or we were brainwashed to think this one way. Again, something else that we had talked about. Old girl, I told you from South Carolina, found out her dad was part of that tribe in West Africa. Please forgive me, I don't want to give you the wrong name. Shit. Long story short, the earliest Y chromosome comes from this area, which is 280,000 years old. He is not was the Limba tribe. He was part of the Limba. Nope, wrong tribe. God dog it. The Limba tribe is a tribe in South Africa that are Hebrew that came from Israel, and they took a boat down there. They have that. The tribe in West Africa, I'm trying to think of it, but they have the earliest X chromosome. Excuse me, Y chromosome. So basically, males have been around for almost 300,000 years. Before that, everybody they found was female. The earliest record of this is in West Africa. It's not the Dogon. They're lower down than the Dogon. God dog, I can't think of the tribe. But the reason this is so important is because we're being told that Africa wasn't nothing. They didn't have anything before the Europeans came over. Not true. Europeans talk about the biggest cities that they ever seen were in Africa. That West Africa, there's a wall in West Africa that's longer than the Great Wall of China. There are so many different things that have existed unmolested for years. When you talk about the richest man in the world, Mansa Musa in the 1400s, how he literally made his pilgrimage all the way to Mecca because he was a good Muslim. But they also don't talk about his brother, Abu Bakr, who abdicated the throne and gave that to him. And Abu Bakr took a flotilla of ships over to South Africa.
But you're missing something very important, though. When Mansa Musa, on his way to Saudi Arabia, he stopped in Egypt. And he delivered more gold than the pharaohs had.
Oh, hold it. Okay. What happened on his pilgrimage, remember, he gave away so much gold, it lowered the price of gold. He got to Egypt, said, hey, let me borrow some of your gold. They said, take it all, because we know you good for it. And so he took more gold with him on his pilgrimage. And then when he went back home, he gave the gold back to Egypt. They don't talk about that. They don't talk about how powerful.
Well, why is that? Because a lot of that information is stored in repositories by people who don't speak English, or people who are not willing to share this information, because it will cast a certain light on their culture or the narrative that has been placed on them. Because do understand that Arabs also have a narrative that they cast on people. And even though they're this tribal people who didn't have a high civilization until, they started like forcing religion on people.
Yeah,
they have a narrative that they're pushing also.
They wrote all this. Remember what KRS said? They wrote all that shit down. When you find out that a lot of their culture is something that they got that culture by conquering people, and they saw the best parts and took it back with them. Now, Roscoe, what's the oldest university on Earth? Where is it located?
Timbuktu.
My nigga, come on. That's the shit that you hear about Cambridge. You hear about. Even nowadays, you hear about Princeton and all this other stuff. Timbuktu is the oldest university, and the thing was, when the European invaders came, they hid their information. They're only now being able to find these books and translate these books. They talk about people writing a check 2,500 years ago. They talk about people doing things, having toilets in these buildings 2,000 years ago. So the stuff that Europe is doing in modern day that we were already doing, and so it has nothing to do to. I don't want to act like these cultures didn't mix and didn't interact, and they didn't intermarry. They did, all within themselves. But like I said, there are 5 phenotypes that are known, and historically, what they talk about when you talk about genetic Eve, they know when Eve left Africa. So you got people in Africa that are not related to her, but she's related to them. That's what people don't want to address. And you realize that these people who left out of Africa 200,000 years ago, they have proof of black folks going into Asia 235,000 years ago. So this whole idea that they had a scientist from Japan. So no, I think he's from China. Please forgive me, not Japan. That's a different scientist. So the scientists, they're trying to prove that Asian and white folks have Neanderthal DNA. So there's another type of ancient human called Denisovans or whatever.
Denisovan.
Denisovan. So what they try to prove is that the Asians had Denisovan in them. That's why they're different from everybody else. And do you know what they found out? Nope, they got black in them. And so they did all this research, and they tested, I want to say 30,000 people from different regions, all of these different regions of China, and they came to the same conclusion that nope, they all come from Africa. And that's something they don't want to talk about. But what they thought was they're going to find proof that we evolved from a different subset of human, and they did not. Now, there's a scientist in Japan, and she's trying to say that, okay, the black folks in Africa do have Neanderthal DNA. You just got to go back further. So they asked her to prove it. She hasn't been able to prove it. We have been humans for over 300, 400,000 years the way we are now. Not some people with hair and shit running around. Now, they did find the oldest remnant, the oldest ancestor of human who was 2 million years old in Ethiopia. That's the one they call Lucy or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, we have been who we are for over 400,000 years. And so this whole idea that these cultures are mixed or these other people, I'm sure other people have brought stuff to Africa, but scientifically this has been proven. The fact that Africans have been trading with South America for years, the fact that Chinese have been trading with Africans for years. Hell, so the narrative that everything just slavery is it, and that's it. No, that's all bullshit. It's what it does. Slavery erases your history. That's what it does. It also makes it easier for people to rewrite your history and give you a different narrative. The whole idea that what's that thing they teach in schools that white folks don't like, critical race theory? The reason white folks don't like it is because white folks invented it. They're the ones who changed history. They're the ones who made all the apostles white. They're the ones who use religion as a tool against the people that gave it to them. Roscoe went back farther, and Christianity was in Ethiopia, out of Ethiopia, in Ethiopia. He went back so far. That's why it's so deep what he's talking about when he talks about these different regions of Punt and how Egyptians even say they came from the Valley of the Moon, which is 2 different places. You have the Dogon tribe who are immensely mathematic, and they're all Old Testament. Some theories say that they're the original Egyptians who went west to get away from the invaders. There's so much history, and they find new history all the time whenever they find a new civilization. And so they're using it, changes narratives every day. But the problem is the people who write the history books aren't changing the history books.
Okay, so we talked about Axumite Empire, which existed from the 1st century AD to the 8th century AD. And now we have the Zagwe dynasty. The Zagwe dynasty ruled Ethiopia from the 12th century to the 13th century. So they were known for their churches that were made from solid rock in the town of Lalibela. Lalibela is a holy pilgrimage city where lots of Christians go, but is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Zagwe dynasty was overthrown by Yakuno-Amlak in 1270, marking the beginning of the Solomonic dynasty. So, what you had at that point was a bunch of people who benefited from previous dynasties that had very little to do with Christianity up until a certain point. Then what you had were people who were traveling to the Middle East, and they were hearing about the Holy Crusades, and they want to get some of that shine. And so they're like, yo, we're from the dynasty of lineage of Solomon and Sheba. And these kingdoms and dynasties played an important role in shaping the history and culture of Ethiopia and laid the foundation for the dynasty of Solomon, which would go on to rule Ethiopia for centuries. The Solomonic dynasty, also known as the House of Solomon, was the ruling dynasty of the Ethiopian Empire from the 13th to the 20th centuries. According to the tradition, the dynasty claimed descent from Menelik I, the son of King Solomon and Queen Sheba. Her name was Mekeda. Here is a brief overview of the main lines of succession. So, after Menelik, he had a son, and that lineage went all the way down to a man named Yakuno-Amlak. He lived from 1270 to 1285, or that's how long he was the king. He created this dynasty that was based on this whole concept of the Solomonic lineage. And he also claimed to be the descendant of the last king of Axum, Nubia.Land, and hence the royal kings of Axum. So then from there, we have a man named Yagbe'u-Seyon from 1285 to 1294. And he was the son of Yakuno-Amlak. Mekeda.
Fatima. There's a third one. I can't think of her name because they don't know for sure which one of these women is the Queen of Sheba. But
they know. They make it confusing. They just say they don't know and just throw a bunch of shit out there.
But they know for a fact that she was trading frankincense or myrrh back then, and we know for a fact that she had contact with King Solomon. But now fast forward to now, like when you get all the way to the modern times with Haile Selassie. That shit is like a soap opera. I didn't realize how bad this nigga was.
Okay, wait a minute. Let me get there first. So you have a lot of people between Yakuno-Amlak and Haile Selassie. So you have people that were successive kings, and I'm going to highlight some of the things that they did. So you had the from 1299 to 1344, Amda-Seyon I, he was the son of Wadem Arad, and he expanded the empire through military campaigns against Muslim enemies. So that highlights something very important, how when you go back to the Sabaean Empire and how the Sabaeans were eventually taken out by Persians and then completely by the Muslims, they
didn't let it happen again.
They held this empire, and they had to recede their lines back to the Ethiopian coast, losing Yemen. So then the Muslims tried to come into Ethiopia through the coast, crossing the sea there, and the Axumite Empire fought them back for quite some time. And then they come back again, and they come back again, and they lose, and they come back again. This guy, Amda-Seyon, he expanded the empire by defeating these Muslim invaders. So this is important to understand that these Muslims keep trying to come up in there, and they're like, nah, kick rocks. So then you have a queen whose name was Zara Yacob, which is, basically Jacob, Zara Jacob.
Yep.
Succeeded by Baida Mariam, who gave the title of Queen Mother to Eleni of Ethiopia, one of his father's wives. So you have all these skirmishes and fights that continue for centuries after that, until you get to a guy named Sarsar Dingle. In 1540 until 1559, he fought against the Ottoman Empire and Adal Sultanate. So then that continued after his death, but his son, Jacob, fought against the Adal Sultanate and the Ottoman Empire. Now, it wasn't until 1607 that one of the kings of Ethiopia converted to Catholicism. But he was eventually kicked out of there because most of the Ethiopians are not Catholic, so kick rocks with that. They're Coptic Christians.
Coptics are the 2nd century.
Egypt.
Yep.
So
that's correct. Yeah, my
yeah.
bad.
So you got to understand, Christianity came to these people through Egypt, because that trade route with, the between Punt or Nubia or Ethiopia or Somalia has always stayed open. So because you have to understand what connects them together, they would travel back and forth either on land, or in areas that were too difficult, they would get on the Nile. The Nile River flows all the way into Nubia.
Well, hold it. So this is some deeper shit. So people don't understand the Ethiopian cross looks different from the cross of other nations. The Ethiopian cross is more of an even cross. That's a specific cross to that region. Again, like you said, their ties to Christianity are from the 2nd century, but also because of their contact with Solomon. So it was a natural progression. But these people they wasn't invaded and it wasn't given to them. It evolved eventually, and they were doing this shit that they're fighting everybody off. They fought everybody off, and then you get to modern day Menelik II, who fought off the Italians. They fought everybody off. They've never been invaded. So that's
hold on, slow down. So there's more, because Dawit III fought against the Ottoman Empire in 1711 to 1716. So that shows that they fought the Ottoman Empire for 200 years, because you still, in 1769, Johannes II, who has a European name, Johannes II restored the Solomonic dynasty after a period of turmoil. So, and this
Ross, you said some deep shit. So
hold on. Wait. So then, again, Saleh Selassie from 1795 to 1813 restored the Solomonic dynasty again after a period of turmoil. And so then you have these skirmishes that continue back and forth. You have Johannes IV defeated an invading Egyptian army in Eritrea, but was killed at the Battle of Galabat. Then you have Menelik II in 1889 until 1913 conquered Italian forces at the Battle of Adwa, expanding the empire's borders. So the son of Menelik II was deposed because he had mental health issues. So then the daughter of Menelik II, Zedwidu, she was the queen, and she ruled as regent for her nephew Haile. Haile Selassie was a young man, and he was born in 1930. Zedwidu was his aunt, and she was the regent controlling the throne until Haile Selassie was old enough. He was the last emperor of Ethiopia, and he was removed in 1974 by the Derg military regime. Now, when you talk to Ethiopians, some people will tell you, depending on the age of that person, that Haile Selassie wasn't as great as most people think, will tell you he was. That is debatable. What is not debatable is what happened to the country after Selassie was removed. So what people need to understand is, when you get rid of kings or dictators or men that control a country for a long period of time, a power vacuum is created. And when these power vacuums are created, you have stuff like what happens in Afghanistan. You have stuff that happens like in Iraq when Saddam Hussein was killed. When Gaddafi was killed, he created a power vacuum, and these Arabs brought in slave markets to sell black Africans on a slave market. Now, the United Nations helped make that happen. United Nations helped make slave markets possible again, also with the Hillary Clinton and Obama administration. They wanted to get rid of Gaddafi because he had created this country. He elevated Libya to a point where it was the highest quality of living in Africa. It had the highest standard of public education in Africa.
Hold it. Okay, the most important part was he
gold.
was
He
Yes,
was trying to basically create a new currency, an
currency
Pan-African currency that would
where you had to
unite
buy
African
gold, you
countries
buy oil,
backed by
with that
gold.
currency. Yep, the
And they
dinar. He's
said,
bringing back the
no,
dinar.
this is too dangerous. You are messing up our narrative that these niggas need us. And they a bunch of poor,
Crazy people can't take
ignorant
care of
motherfuckers
themselves.
in loincloths running around killing each other. And it's going to fuck up our narrative.
Even going back to Haile Selassie, his birth name was Rastafarian. That's why the Rastafarians,
Rastafari.
Rastafari,
So Rastafarians are people
to
who
follow him.
follow Rastafari.
Yeah, and
So
here's the
now
part.
you have this town in Ethiopia called Sheshemane. Sheshemane are where all the Rastas from Jamaica travel to on their pilgrimage to
Pilgrimage.
live in Ethiopia. So in Ethiopia, you have a huge Rasta influence in this town called Sheshemane.
Look, what happened was they said Haile Selassie was the second coming. He's a ruler. He's from the house of David. He's powerful. He defeated a bunch of white folks. So that's their Jesus. So these Rastafarians in Jamaica said he's Jesus because he met all these criteria, and so it's what it is. Look, the reason this is so important is because people have been brainwashed to think that if you're in Africa and you're light complected, it's because you are mixed. And this whole mixed thing, people come in contact, they sleep with each other, they have sex, they've been doing it for thousands of years. But the idea that this culture is older than the culture that these other people are referring to. Whenever they find a new book in the Bible, the Temptation of Solomon and stuff like that, they find it in Ethiopia. The books in Ethiopia, even the time in Ethiopia, they have a different year than we got. When they have a Bible, they translate the Bible. That's how. So when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they compared it to Bibles from Ethiopia. Like, hey, yep, that's what it says. Yep, that's correct. So those translations go back and forth. And one of the favorite things you talk about is the Kebra Nagas, the Book of Kings.
Now, you just got that book. What did you
Yeah.
learn in reading this book?
One of the most important things that you just showed in this podcast, a lot of those names that you think are Arab are not Arab. They're actually from Ethiopia. The whole flying carpet is Ethiopian. There's
This
so many
is,
things.
okay, what I'm talking about. When I started talking about these two empires, Punt and the Sabaeans, which came after the land of Punt. And the Sabaeans are where the magic carpet concept and all
Comes
this
from.
stuff comes
Yeah.
from.
So
Because what
this
you
is
got to
how it's built.
understand, at the time, the Arab people were just desert tribes people living in tents. There was no civilization there. They were just wanderers.
The point is that we're so confused by what culture is that we are attributing something to the wrong culture. There's a culture that's much older where that information actually came from. These things, the names that you gave, a lot of those names sounded like they were Arab. They're not. The Arabs got their names from these people because they fought them off. They weren't invaded. So things that you attribute to Arabs, nah, bro. There's an older culture that's been fighting off people, Arabs, Christians, the Ottoman Empire, the same ones who invaded Europe, the Ottomans, Turks who took over Europe. That's the reason for the Crusades. Did not make it in Africa. They couldn't fuck with Ethiopians. They're like, hey, we tried to take it, they wouldn't let us. So while this is going on in the Crusades in the 1700s was going on, they were unsuccessful in trying to get into Africa. They were unsuccessful trying to get into Ethiopia.
So people also need to understand that history goes much further back in the time, and they always The problem I see a lot is people always want to start around the time of Jesus, or they want to go back maybe 1,000 years, and they stop right there. They don't go back any further than that. Now,
Why is that?
I'm
We know the
talking to
reason.
you about the land of Punt, the empire of Punt, of Nubia, which basically existed almost 5,000 years ago. The year 4,500. that far back. These people were kicking it a long time ago in luxury. This is the part that blows people's minds, is that they had abundance. They weren't living in a desert struggling, eating dates and shit, trying to, survive off beetle dung. No, 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 no.
Nope.
You got to understand that these people that were in this area, they were thriving. This was a thriving empire. They were doing so well that Egyptians traded with them on a regular basis. They did so well, they called it the land of the gods. Ta Netjer, the land of the gods.
I thought it was Ta Seti, but either way.
No, that's something different altogether. Ta Netjer.
Look, the bottom line is these people have been there for, we said, at least 6,000 years. We know it's been longer because, like I said, those obelisks are much older. So they've been there. This is not some Johnny-come-lately. I think what happens is when somebody finds out about something, then all of a sudden it's based on their knowledge of it.
Okay, but take, for example, Atlantis and Lemuria.
Yep.
So Atlantis existed for 10,000 years before the Jews of the Bible inhabited the earth. Atlantis was destroyed by water, and the refugees eventually settled in Egypt, Ghana, and the Andes Mountains of South America. And so that's how you get these pyramids, these multi-dimensional, multi-purpose structures are built. And they have all these fascinating capabilities, and it's like totally mind-blowing how they were constructed, and like under today's archaeological methods, they can't replicate them. It's because these people come from a different state of mind, and they were one of the different root races. They talk about how there's different root races of humanity and how there were 5 to 6 of them. Well, the inhabitants of modern-day North America are considered the 6th root race.
Oh, hell, you get deep. Okay, that's some crazy shit, but they even said the inhabitants of Mu, which the Greeks and Romans called Lemuria, were short, dark-skinned people. So when you talked about
they say the people from Lemuria were 8 to 9 feet tall, and that people are getting progressively smaller, actually, because the Lemurians and the Atlanteans were the fourth root race, and they had colors of different levels of melanin, which prevented which created different types of people. So these people existed in a solid physical form after the fall of angelic beings and the war in heaven. And the mythology of Titans began in the time of Lemuria and Atlantis. So these Lemurians built large cities using rare earth metals and crystalline structures. And the Lemurian civilization was located 30 miles west of Easter Island in the Pacific Ocean, which explains why these Easter Island statues, not just the head, but the full statues that they've discovered is actually buried up to the chin, is there facing that direction. They're all facing that direction because that was the area that Lemuria was in, that direction they're facing in, 30 miles west off the coast.
Okay, look, if I start saying, so there's people that say that Lemuria and Atlantis went to war. It was a bunch of crazy stuff going on, and it went on for years. And there's like documentation of this. There's books from that South Pacific. They find documents. I don't want to just say books like a book you read. They're finding documents. They're finding proof that there was these two civilizations didn't get along, or it's craziness. But it's so much deeper than what. The whole idea of Atlantis is some fantasy stuff that we see on Disney, but there's more to it. There's stuff that proves that this place existed. These readings and these books say that Atlantis was a sister of Egypt. That's what Plato's ancestors said 1,200 years ago. Excuse me. Solon. Very yeah. So this is not conjecture. They have more information about it. They don't want you to know about it because what happens is if you find out who you are, you can't be controlled by these little people. So here's some deep shit. Roscoe, he's on point. I know this sounds like fantasy. Nope. If you find one or two of these books and start reading them. It will change who you. It will completely change your mind. That's why he talks about books are so important to have. Documentaries are nice, but books where you can go back and check the reference, where you go like, hey, I don't agree with that, but right here in this Farmer's Almanac, it says this, this, and this. You need to be able to protect your information from the outsiders. We talked about this 3 podcasts ago, where you're not able to buy anything anymore. You got to subscribe to some streaming place. You don't own the song, you don't own the CD, but it's important owning the CD, the record, the tape, the song, whatever. It's important owning the book, the pamphlet, because the powers that be love to change history.
So the pyramids were actually built and partially destroyed and then repaired over the course of about 12,000 to 15,000 years. And then 3,000 years later, you have Göbekli Tepe. Now, Göbekli Tepe is such a weird, strange, and anomalous thing because it was a Phoenician city built around 9,000 BC, and where a triad of deities were worshipped known as Heliopolis during the Hellenistic period. And it retained religious function during the Roman empires when the sanctuary of Heliopolis, Jupiter, attracted thousands of pilgrims. And they create this temple of Jupiter. And they also had the temple of Mercury. Well, I'm sorry, I need to fix something. So it's Göbekli Tepe was built 10,000 years ago during the Ice Age. And then what it was is that Baalbek is a temple in Baalbek, Lebanon, that was built in 9,000 BC, 1,000 years later. And it was built as a tribute to Baal, for Baal worship.
Look, one of the theories about Göbekli Tepe is that it's 10 to 12,000 years old. They think it was built by the survivors of the Ark. They're saying it was buried on purpose. They said that they got different animals on there that don't live in that region.
Yeah, but see, you could say that it's built by the survivors of the Ark, and all that does is tie in that same biblical story, which it may be older than the Ark itself.
Slow down. No.
Because if you think about, when they talk about the civilizations that Cain had built, that looks like something that would have been around before Cain, or the civilizations that he had an influence on. Because when you look at it, it has a very savage sexual nature to it. So it's weird. Somebody actually described it as a soul recycling machine.
Look, okay, people love to attribute shit to the Bible, but the story of the Great Flood existed before the Bible existed. Bible's 6,000 years old. The Great Flood happened. We know there was one at 11,000 and 12,000 and 13,000 years. So the story, people, just because you stick the story in the Bible, don't mean the story came from the Bible. You dig what I'm saying? We use Noah, but we know for a fact that story of the Great Flood existed long before the Bible did. It was put in the Bible. So just because I refer to it as Noah, that's not necessarily who was in that boat. You feel me? And some people say that the pyramids were designed to withstand that Great Flood because it should have happened before. These stories are 12,000 and 20,000 years old.
So you got to understand like where these stories fit. So the pyramid existed before Göbekli Tepe. And then Göbekli Tepe was built. And then Baalbek was built. And then you have the Babylonian empires that were built. But they were installed by basically Marduk. He was a satanic Anunnaki hybrid. Yep. And he aligned with the Nibiruan forces in order to seize control of the Giza Stargate during this Luciferian rebellion. This primarily focused on the systematic extermination of these Celtic Druidic Grail lines by organizing strategic Essene, those are the people of Jesus, massacres, and then tracking and killing and assuming the identities of the founder Christ beings. So, through the installation of a succession of Marduk controlled by Babylonian kings in what is present-day Iraq, they created an empire that settled around the Middle East for gaining control over the main 2D and 4D stargates.
It's some evil shit that goes on in that area, like what was it, Gog and Magog, and They talk about, like, there's some demonic shit in that area, and it goes back a long way. Uh, there are book there are books like the Nebuchadnezzar, whatever that book people would joke about. There's a real book that's based on that comes from that area that talks about magic and some evil shit. It's a, like I said, look up
But
Moth
see,
and Rock.
that's why you see in those empires these non-human hybrid entities, these people that have a human head and an animal
Or just
body.
opposite. They have a human body and an animal. You see that shit.
So then you see these strange bloodline blood cults controlling these Middle Eastern rulers and power elite global players based upon their ongoing genetic modification and grooming them into these blood sex cults. So then that brings you back to Baalbek. That is the earthly incarnation of that Baal worship and that evil sex blood cult.
People and animals, and you had crossbreeds. I think I always thought that's why bestiality is illegal. Not because it's disgusting, yes, but what would happen if you fucked around and had a little goat baby? There's shit out there. There's bloodlines out there. There's DNA out there.
So then, and you have all this weird shit going on in Babylon, and then what happens? God flushes the toilet. I'm gonna have a flood to wash all this shit away. Now that doesn't cover the entire planet because you have people in higher elevations that weren't affected by that.
But anytime somebody wants to argue about that, there's proof. Go right back to Easter Island. There's clearly a flood or some kind of mud flood, or you wouldn't have these 20-foot, 30-foot statues with just the head sticking out, and then they excavate them, and it goes down 3 or 4 more meters. You're like, oh my God, this is a whole person. And the crazy part is the way they have their hands match statues in South America. This has been proven. This has been shown. So, like I said, whatever was going on there, that was a regional thing. It was going on all over the Pacific and going, going into South America. There is a huge joint history that has been hidden on purpose because if you knew the history, every time we talk about a doctor coming through with a breakthrough, they get killed. We just talked about the doctor who did the telomere strands and was making people younger. They could not let that brother live. They couldn't because that was some ancient knowledge that he was coming up with. He had a premonition, understood something, and created the ability for people to get younger. Dude just disappeared. We're just telling you that this ancient knowledge is in us. You can find it, you can look it up, but people are afraid to, because the people in charge want to stay in charge. They want to stay petty. They want to keep us fighting over money and land. You know these tribes. I'll give you Pakistan and India. They've been warring for years. But here's the ironic part. They're the same people. English split them up. India is named for the Indus River that's in Pakistan. So that tells you that those people are naturally together. They got split up by some English folks, and now they're fighting while English takes the resources. They've been doing this shit for years. You see it in regions of Africa. You see 2 tribes who are fighting each other because one tribe.
Christopher Chapman, for those who want to know the name of that black CEO, had a company called Telomere. His name was Christopher Chapman.
This stuff can be looked up. When you look up what this guy was working on, and that he had experimented on German Shepherds, and it was working. Look, we always bring this up. He had to. I'm sure he used it on himself. Come on, every scientist who comes up with a great idea.
Tell them what it did.
Okay, what it is when you aging. So when your cells divide and split and replicate, what causes aging is the telomere strands get shorter and shorter. He found a way to elongate those strands, so that means that you're able to not get older, but you just keep living. So they didn't want somebody living forever, so they stopped this dude. But those telomere strands, look them up. So when a cell splits and it duplicates, the strand gets shorter and shorter. So we get new cells all the time, but because the telomere is getting shorter and shorter, you're getting older and older. Basically, the quality of your cells is not the same as it was the day you were born. But if you can increase those telomere strands, which is what he did, all of a sudden, the aging is put on hold. That's some vampire shit. That's some amazing things that this guy was working on.
Hey, so I want to go back real quick to the land of Punt, the Nubian Empire that was trading all of these lush natural resources with Egypt. That existed 2,200 years before the Epic of Gilgamesh. Just to give you an idea of time.
Well, look, they tell us Epic of Gilgamesh goes back for years.
Epic of Gilgamesh is 2,750 years ago.
Look, I think that's when it was discovered, because allegedly that's where the story of Noah, the great flood story, comes from.
No, that's not where it was discovered. That's when it was written down.
Written down
on 12 clay tablets.
But see, that's the point I'm making. These stories are much older than the people that we accredit them to. That's all I was trying to say. Excuse me. Is that just because when you find something, all of a sudden you're aware of it, and now you think that's the bee's knees, and it started right there. No, just your awareness of something. Just because you found out about Africa, just because you found out about the civilization, doesn't mean that civilization just began there. That civilization or whatever it was existed 12,000 years before your knowledge, before you were aware of it. So I think that's where our bias comes in, and that's how we get things confused, and that's how we screw up history. That these things were existing longer than before we gave it a name. It was already there. That's what I'm saying. Excuse me.
Well, listen. We have been discussing ancient African empires, something you should take your time and spend some time looking up and learn about, and pick up books, actual books. Don't watch YouTube videos on this stuff, because the YouTube videos don't have enough time to cover these things in detail.
They should inspire you.
What they do is they'll give you a little bit of information, a little taste, but they don't have enough time to give you exact details and break down diagrams and show you who was who and over an entire stretch of time. They have to condense these things into a short amount of time, which is why you should get these books and absorb this information and have it in your library, because they are trying to delete the internet. Archive.org was hacked because they're trying to delete the internet. So
all the MTV shit is gone.
Exactly.
We grew up on MTV. Look, the bottom line is this: is that you should be inspired by that stuff. That stuff. When you see a little snippet, run your ass to the library, Google that shit, find out the books, and find out where that information came from.
Order the books online and find them and order them and have them in your possession. Look, that's all I got. We out. Peace.
Holla back.